My name's Aaron Kacharski. I think I know most of you. We have some folks here that are like not in the RAP network, and so I'm just going to talk about Recovery Advocacy Project for a couple minutes before we kind of turn over to Third Horizon Strategies, who is helping to run this recovery set aside piece campaign, both with strategy around single state agencies, which is where we're prioritizing the work that Recovery Advocacy Project does in terms of messaging and working to contact our single state agencies and generate letters. I'll get to that in a minute. But really, if you're not familiar with Recovery Advocacy Project, you might have been on the call we had last week with some RCOs across the country. And so if you're joining us and this is your first introduction to Recovery Advocacy Project, welcome. We actually work to think and act locally. And so we're really focused on that ground up, grassroots, community level to the state level mentality. It's very rare that we'll take action on like a federal piece of legislation or anything like that. And so there's other organizations that are really kind of focusing on the contacts to U.S. senators and U.S. Congress on this issue. Recovery Advocacy Project really kind of works in the realm of the local statewide piece. We have state organizing teams in we're close to 40 states right now, and they're tasked with listening to grassroots advocates in the states and working to come up with community and legislative-based solutions around what we're hearing from people. And so we've been hearing about recovery housing, we've been hearing about more collegiate recovery programs or recovery community organizations, or diversifying grantees across states to reach more communities, or recovery community centers. And all of that work that we've been hearing from grassroots becomes a whole lot easier when there's resources and funding put towards it. And so this recovery set aside is something that has never happened before. I'm going to let Tim talk really about what some of the specifics of that are. But this is one of those things where it's an all hands on deck sort of approach. And I just wanted, so if you're not on a Recovery Advocacy Project state organizing team currently, and you want to be involved on a state organizing team, every single one of those teams that I mentioned in the close to 40 states meets bi-weekly. And so if you are not on one of those teams and want to be, and you want to be plugged into that, Garrett just dropped a Google form in the chat box. If you're already on a team, don't fill that out. We already have you on the team. This is just for folks that aren't in the RAP network, Recovery Advocacy Project network. And so if you're joining us for the first time and not on a state team, please take a second to fill out that Google form that Garrett just dropped. Moving forward, so that's the Recovery Advocacy Project basics, and then kind of switching gears right into strategy around single state agencies and communicating with them about this recovery set aside. I'm going to drop an action in the chat box. Garrett might have it too, but I think I have it ready. Oops. Nope, I have the passcode that I copied and pasted. Hold on.
I got it, Aaron.
You got it. All right. Thank you very much. I know it's in my browser. Garrett's going to drop the action. That is a letter writing campaign that we just launched a couple days ago, really the end of last week. It's been up live for about a week. This is a very direct and simple letter writing campaign to governors and single state agencies. Honestly, we're at about, I think there's 1,600 action takers people that have already taken this action across the country. I think that's great for a week. I think that we are capable of generating tens of thousands across the country, whether you belong to a recovery community organization or you're on a recovery advocacy project team. I think that, getting that link out, make if we can all take that link that's in the chat of the action, make sure we've personally taken that link. And then once you do that, once you take that action, there's a lot of social media tips on how to share that with others, and then sample emails as well. We've found that, if you're in an organization, you want to send it on to members of your organization, or put the link in a Facebook group that you belong to. If everybody on this call did that within the next 24 hours and did that over the next week, we're going to start to get there in terms of like what we think we need in terms of the amount of letters across this country to governors and SSAs. Go ahead, Garrett.
Aaron, I just want to say one thing about this action, because and especially in terms of single state agencies, I know for a fact that it's, governor, this is going to your governor and your SSA. Governors have staffs and they're receiving stuff, so you might not get it. I know for a fact SSAs are getting a lot of emails, and they are getting them personally because they are our SSA called and asked if we could stop, and we said no. But so like I know that they're going directly to your SSAs and they're seeing them. So it is important, and if everyone can help with that, I appreciate it.
Right. So that action paired with the direct outreach to SSAs from the grassroots community by folks that are on this call. And relationships with SSAs are different in every state. And so that's where this gets a little different. But either way, having that cover for any SSA to be like, yeah, I'm hearing about this. The recovery community is speaking out. This is important. We need to make this happen. And so that paired with the individual outreach that we're going to talk about today. And we're gonna open it up for questions at the end of this as well, because I know that some people it'll be specific to your state, your questions, and so we'll be more than happy to try to answer that on this call. With that, and so anyway, take that link with letters to governors and SSAs and get that out far and wide, and as best as you can. With that, I'm gonna pass things over to Tim, who's doing work with Third Horizon Strategies, who is tasked with doing some messaging around this and work. I know some folks on this call have also done outreach to your U.S. Senator and U.S. Congressperson, and that element of all of this is important as well. But he's going to talk a little bit about the specifics around this and what this recovery set aside would mean for states. And so, Tim, I see you. I think you're on the second page here. There you are.
I am.
Yes. All right.
Thank
you very much for being here.
Well, thank you, Aaron and Garrett, and thank you all. It's a real honor to be here. I will start off by saying I've been with Third Horizon Strategies. We're a healthcare consulting firm based out of Chicago, but we have a team that works nationally. I'm including my good colleague and friend, Greg Williams, who sends his regards. He unfortunately couldn't be here today. I am new to the firm. Prior to that, I worked at the New Hampshire Charitable Foundation and did a lot of work in the space of philanthropy around addiction and recovery supports, and see some good friends from New Hampshire on the call who were my former grantees. So I'm really thrilled to be here and honored to work with all of you. I'm not a person in long-term recovery. I always feel it's important to say that when I'm talking to my recovery partners, but I hope to be one of the proudest allies on the planet for you all. So just really thrilled to be able to talk to you about this opportunity. I am going to try, I've got a bit of a slide deck, so I'll try and share my screen and see if this gives us what we want. So let's give it a try. Allow, so forgive me for just a second. And my system doesn't want to let me share. Yes, I want to share. Let's see. Okay. Sorry, guys, hold on a minute. Here, I thought this was all set.
It's all right. If you need to email it to us and have us do it, we can do it.
Yeah, let me do that because my computer's asking funny questions that I've never seen before, and like, why waste time with all of that? So just guys, give me just a quick sec so I can email this over to them, and then they can get it up on the screen for you all. And fortunately, I will just start off by saying as well, we'll talk about what has come out of the president's budget, and I'll turn it over to my colleague, Holly, who will also be able to talk a little bit about how to frame it strategically. But fortunately, we're coming to you today with already a lot of progress and wind at our back, which is why I think it's really great timing for you all to be reaching out to your SSAs on this work. So let me there we go. All right, so slide deck is on its way. Apologies for the technical gaffe. But let me go ahead and just talk about, I'm assuming everyone on this call is familiar with the block grant. Obviously, the block grant has been in existence since the early 80s. The idea being to give states sort of a formulaic allocation of resources where they could do quality work in substance use disorders. It has been largely focused on treatment and prevention. And some of you may be aware, as we're going to talk about today, what's been done relative to recovery set aside. There are other set asides in the block grant, particularly in prevention. And my background in addiction has included work in prevention. So I have some familiarity with both the promise of block grant set-asides and the downside of block grant set-asides. So what I'd like to do today is just walk you through what is in the president's budget, how that would play out in the block grant, and what the impacts might be nationally as well as by state. And we have some resources to have Aaron and Garrett said to you all in follow-up, so that you'll get a sense of what it may mean to your state, as well as a little bit of some of the rationale behind, thank you guys, behind the set aside that was created by SAMHSA. So we'll run through this as soon as the slide deck gets up, and then can certainly take some questions if you want to go to the first slide, guys. Thanks. Okay, so the president's budget includes a number of things that are exciting in the space of behavioral health and addiction. The first thing to note is that there is an overall increase that the president is proposing in a number of different grant programs. And you see on your slide that top block, the key increases that the president has put in place in both the block grant, state opioid response grants, B Corps, and recovery community support programs. So those increases are in the mix as well. What we are particularly focusing on, and what's exciting about this, is that they also call to create a 10% set aside for non-clinical recovery support services. Again, it would be structured in many ways similar to the prevention set aside, which basically says states have to spend a minimum. In prevention, it's 20%. On the proposed recovery set aside, it would be 10%. But states, that would be the floor, not the ceiling. So states would have to spend a minimum of 10% of their block grant on non-clinical recovery support services. So that would, and you can see some of those numbers on the screen right now. It's important, obviously, it's not uncommon when new money comes around, the various sides of the substance abuse, the continuum of care kind of can get at each other about the dollars. One of the reasons why we're excited about this recovery set aside, and we feel like now is the time to really push this, is that prevention and treatment also see increases given the overall increase in the block grant. So this is not a proposal that would necessarily take resources away from treatment or prevention services and redeploy them, but instead provide targeted resources to recovery supports while at the same time elevating and increasing investments across the continuum of care. Why don't we go to the next slide? So this is just a quick sort of historical record of funding that has been going to states over the last several years. The blue bar indicates the block grant. The yellow bar is STR and SOR funding. And then that black that you see in 2021, that black was COVID-related funding. It was one time. But I draw your attention to that because the 2022, the proposed allocation brings the total of the block grant dollars and SOAR dollars and these other resources not quite to the total that included that emergency funding earlier this year, but a substantive march forward. So setting aside the pandemic and related response dollars, this is a dramatic increase in funding for behavioral health, both through the block grant and other vehicles. Next slide, please. You know, and a couple of pieces of why when SAMHSA, when the president presents a budget, the federal agency that oversees those dollars gives some rationale as to why those budget dollars are the way they are. So we've pulled out here, and we'll send around this deck so you can get these talking points for your own use. But some of the rationale that SAMHSA included, right? As you all know, recovery services are notoriously underfunded, very difficult currently to pull state or federal resources into recovery supports. And as a result, we have very few recovery community organizations in the United States. Compare that, 140 is what's listed on this slide. Compare that to, in prevention, between the prevention set aside and drug-free communities and other resources, there are 5,000 substance abuse prevention coalitions all across the state. There are almost 16,000 treatment programs. So there is a recognition here that there's a real inequity in the continuum of care where recovery, non-clinical recovery support services don't get nearly the resources they need. And so they don't nearly exist to the extent that other parts of the continuum exist as well. Next slide, please. The other piece too is that this is important, that we are working, and part of the work that's being done at the national level with some of the national advocacy partners, Holly and her team at CDI and us, is really trying to define what we mean with this set aside. The goal is to really support non-clinical recovery support services, recovery community organizations, access and support for recovery housing services, the technical assistance necessary to make those things happen. All things that we know are not reimbursable by insurance. That much like in prevention, right? There are prevention strategies, and the rationale for the prevention set aside is you cannot use insurance, you cannot use quote unquote clinical financing mechanisms to fund those services, and yet they're important. So the justification for this set aside is baked in there as well, recognizing non-clinical recovery supports aren't reimbursable by insurance. They shouldn't be reimbursable by insurance in many ways. But we need stable, substantive resources that are flexible, that can allow communities and recovery leaders to provide to their communities the myriad of social support services that are needed without having to pigeonhole into some sort of clinical methodology that is really not in keeping with the spirit of pure non-clinical recovery community support services. Next slide. One of the other things that we've been working with, and I won't read this whole thing, and again, we'll send it later, but there is an attempt to make sure that when we talk about this set aside, that we are creating language that is as broad as humanly possible, so that when it hits the ground, when states do have decisions to make and communities have decisions to make around how to use these dollars, they are really flexible to meet the needs as the recovery community defines them. I will tell you, having worked with the prevention set aside for most of my career, there are real challenges with how the prevention set aside is worded that quite frankly create situations where my state gets those dollars and the parameters under which they can spend them don't really match what the need is in the community. So there is an effort underway to create some briefing documents for Congress, to work with SAMHSA and other partners to make sure that we define recovery supports and non-clinical supports in enough of a broad way that it still gives states the flexibility to be sure that if this set aside goes through, the dollars can actually hit the ground in a way that works first and foremost for the recovery community in ways that the recovery community has identified. So again, that's why we're talking about RCOs, recovery housing, recovery schools, employment-based recovery projects, or other things, not trying to pigeonhole into what a sort of basic definition of recovery supports could be that may risk creating a situation where the block grant flows into the state, this set aside is available, and yet it still doesn't quite meet the needs as the recovery community identifies them in states. So that's work that's ongoing right now. The next, we could just go back one slide. One of the things that we will send you afterwards is that our firm has developed a spreadsheet that looks at what the dollar implications are for every state in the US. So here it's alphabetical order, Alabama through Florida. We have every state, so we will send this along. You can see on the far left of the screen is the total appropriation of the block grant in 2020, the appropriation of the block grant as it is in 2021, what's called for in the president's budget, the difference in the total amount of the block grant, and then just for reference, you see the breakout by state of what the prevention set aside looks like at 20%, and then what a recovery set aside would look like. So you can have a sense of how much money this could potentially earmark for recovery services in your state. You know, one of the things I will note, of course, to Aaron's point, is appreciating every state is different. There are some states that we know, and New Hampshire is one of them, not so much with its block grant, but with other federal resources. Our SSA here in New Hampshire has been making meaningful investments in recovery support services. So in some states, this dollar figure may match exactly to a level of investment that the state is engaging in right now. But we also know, having talked to many of you and know from many other states, there are states that are putting none of their block grant dollars in. So this would mark a substantive increase in the availability of recovery supports funding in your states. Next slide. So the strategy, just so that you understand, you know, as Aaron said, you know, you guys have a really great opportunity to really help push this forward at the state level with your SSAs, with your governors. So, you know, at the same time, there is also being work done across the United States, meeting actively with the federal delegations, particularly those that are on appropriations. And Holly can talk about that in a little bit. We have begun. Obviously, some of this work coming out of the president's budget came from informed conversations with SAMHSA. So there is work being done with congressional staffers, with congressmen and senators directly, with the White House and with other federal agencies, just to make sure that we are prepared collectively to coordinate the right response so that we get Congress to move in support of the president's budget. I will also note, you know, our firm, as well as others on a sort of a national team, are also wanting to listen very much to partners like you on the ground and other advocates and stakeholders across the country. We really want to make sure that as this moves through Congress, we're giving Congress the right information, not only to encourage our congressional leaders to support this effort, but again, to make sure that if we're successful collectively, what comes out of the federal budget actually works on the ground in community. So I think as you all are having your conversations, you know, we're really valuing the wisdom and intel from our community partners around ways in which this block grant, these dollars can be helpful, things we need to consider to make sure that they come set up and structured in a way that works for you. So this whole loop is all happening at once. And so now, because of what's happening in Congress, is the right time to engage all of you in hoping to work with your SSA and partners and governors to make sure that we elevate with them this opportunity. And if we could go, I think, to the last slide, and then I will stop. A couple of weeks ago, there was a hearing for the new director of SAMHSA, the Assistant Secretary for Mental Health and Substance Use, Miriam Rittman. Her nomination is going through. The way the process works for folks who don't follow the work nationally is that there is a public hearing in the Senate, and then there follows a period of time where there are questions for the record, where senators get to put in writing questions to the nominee that the nominee has to respond to. With local advocates in the state of Minnesota, super successful to get Senator Tina Smith to ask a question of Miriam on the set aside that is proposed in the president's budget. And you see Miriam's response here. You know, and Miriam, for those of you who don't know her, she is in Health and Human Services in Connecticut. So this is work she does and she knows quite well, and her answer reflected that. We felt this was strategically important and an opportunity to get on the record early support from the new SAMHSA leader on this opportunity, and we were thrilled to see Senator Smith ask it. So just again to reemphasize the fact that there's hopefully wind at the backs of this at the national level. You all really come in at a moment where we think it's really key to make sure that SSAs and governors are aware, and to the extent that we can have them on board in supporting this with your federal delegations, that will go a long way to keep moving this forward. So I'll pause there, turn it back over to Aaron and Garrett if we want to take questions now. If we want to turn it over to Holly first, we'll sort of be at your beck and call on that.
Yeah, let's go to Holly for a couple minutes, and then we'll kind of open things up to questions. I have a feeling like that some of the questions might be like very state specific, or like, you know, like, and just so let's have Holly go, and then we'll kind of come back here.
Okie dokie. So I have been asked to not confuse matters too much by making too strong of a pitch for federal advocacy. But I do want to lay out kind of the timeline here, and then let people know, because I know several of the folks on this call also have been in contact with offline and other conversations, that the House Appropriations Committee, who, as Tim mentioned, are kind of the next round of decision makers. So, just to be clear, the president proposes his budget, and then Congress can look at it and in many instances say, that's hilarious. We're not going to do whatever proposal or provision he wants. We're going to write our own bill. So right now he's proposed a set aside, but if the House and Senate don't come to an agreement and include it in their appropriations bill, the set aside won't exist absent that action. So the next step in the process is for the House Appropriations Committee to meet, and they have a subcommittee markup scheduled for July 12th, and then the full committee markup is on July 15th. So some of you who I've been in contact with for setting up meetings, it's been in relatively short order because we're on a very tight time frame leading up to when this bill is going to be considered, and the committee staff are literally writing it as we speak. On the Senate side, the schedule is a little less clear. The Senate might consider the Senate Appropriations Committee might consider their bill in July, or that could slip to September. So what we've been doing right now is identifying advocates around the country who are in key areas. And so meaning that they have a member of Congress who is on the Appropriations Committee on the House or Senate, identifying them and then setting up a meeting on their behalf, virtual meetings that we also are attending. And the pitch then is for them to let the member of Congress's staff know how important this would be for the local community and how the money could help to support or grow recovery support services back home. So I am gonna just post, if it's okay with Aaron and folks, links to the House and Senate Appropriations Committee members. If you see that your member of Congress is on that list and you have not already been in contact with me, I'll also post my email address. If you can email me directly, that would be super. And I can link you up with work that's already underway, or take advantage of that relationship and work on setting up meetings for you. I should say also that there's a couple of other things in the works. Some of you hopefully everyone has seen a letter for organizations to sign on to. And that's going to be important as we go to the Hill, because we'd love to be able to say, we have this list of 500 groups or whatever it may be that are all supporting the set aside. And, and other things that we've worked on over the years, like parity and the Affordable Care Act, these sign-on letters are really powerful, and they provide an opportunity for us to show our strength in one shot. The other thing that will be coming down the pike is a sign-on letter. This will be for members of Congress to sign on to the first to the House Appropriations Committee. And so you might be seeing emails about that. And again, that letter would be for the member of Congress to sign on to, but that will be an opportunity for everyone to ask their member of Congress to sign on to that letter probably next week. So in the meantime, I will go ahead and post these committee lists and my email address. And so if you see that you are in a key state, like looking at this list, let's say Washington or Alabama, we would very much like to hear from you.
Yes,
so here's the Senate list.
Sheila is on from Alabama, and Mark Litfine is over in Alabama as well. He's not on the call right now, but both those folks are fantastic recovery advocacy project members out there.
And the reason why that we're looking, if you don't see your state on here, by no means feel like that we are snubbing you or anything. It's just these are the members who are the decision makers at this point. And I mentioned, Alabama because, for example, the ranking member of the Senate Appropriations Committee is Senator Shelby of Alabama. So these are folks who have a lot of control over how this process shakes out.
Excellent. Thank you, Holly, for the work that you all are doing and guiding that, the piece on the federal delegation. And definitely remain off mute to help with messaging or any questions that people might have. When Garrett and I kind of go from state team to state team and we ask people, do you have a relationship with your SSA? Like that answers all over the map. And so we want to, like in South Carolina, we have a great relationship with the recovery coordinator who has a great relationship with the director at the SSA. And so, there are those sort of avenues. And so I think that a lot of folks here, whether they have like a working relationship with their SSA or they have, you saw in the chat, there's some states that don't have a good, there's not, there's not a priority for recovery in some states. And so, and Tim, I'm sure you can help answer people's questions too, but let's open it up now. We kind of want to leave the rest of this call to wide open for people to kind of ask some of their questions that they might have. And Garrett wants to chime in real quick as well.
Yeah, just real quick, just to let everybody, Tim said we'll send around that PowerPoint because I know a lot of the questions is around talking points and things that can be used. And I think as Aaron and I are working with all of you in our state organizing team meetings, the goal is going to be start setting up meetings with your SSAs and making sure that you're prepared. And that's also something that Holly and Tim will be able to help us with moving forward as too. So like that is the next kind of step for our organizing efforts on our teams, is to at least have one or two of our team members actively pursuing meetings with the SSAs. And like everybody said, like the talking points and all the language, and we'll work with you on all of that, but you also have all the materials ahead of time. I just want to, that will all be coming later this afternoon. I'll send over. And then I could also include, Holly, if it's all right, I'll include your links to the key states that need it as well. And you'll have that in the follow-up also. But yeah, I really, back to Aaron's point, please, I know you asked a lot of the state organizing calls. Everyone's asked us questions that I told you there's people much smarter than me that can answer them for you. So please don't be shy and ask all the questions you need to right now.
I think maybe starting with that one in the chat with Jason, and then we'll go to Jordan real quick. But Jason has a great, because I know that we've talked about this, Tim and Holly. I don't know if we know where this is, but is there an SSA letter of support, like a sign-on letter specifically for SSAs that are coming out to support this? And obviously, we want people to SSAs to publicly say it out loud. But is there an official sign-on that people can do? I'll let Holly and Tim kind of take that piece.
We don't have one drafted, but certainly could put that together and send that to you. I don't know if strategically it makes more sense. I would think maybe they want to do them individually rather than a letter across 50 states, but
right.
That might be, you guys know the state politics better than I do on that one, but we can certainly send a letter that folks could use if they're willing to sign on.
And then let's go to Jordan for Jordan, Pennsylvania, and then Courtney in Maine.
Okay, thanks for having me. So for me, obviously Aaron said I reside in Pennsylvania, and the agency that I work for, we work with two different SCAs, and I have one SCA that we can certainly create a dialogue with. And, my other SCA is very punitive. And, I get labeled, for lack of a better term, public enemy number one, because we push back or we ask questions, and funding has always been determined by popularity contest. You know, I see a lot of county money going to out-of-county providers. In Pennsylvania, we are seeing millions of state dollars going to organizations that aren't in Pennsylvania. And, you know, for my region in particular, the people that sit in a place of, you know, power and decision making, you know, they are not a part of the recovery community, and nor do they actually value the voice of the recovery community. You know, my county, it's hard to get providers to speak up and advocate because they run the risk of losing contracts, losing funding, and then going out of business. You know, so I don't know how to, you know, how do we proceed?
Yeah, if I can chime in, and it's it is the right question. And a couple of thoughts that I would say to all of you, and having seen, you know, meditations on this theme in the chat, and appreciating again what Aaron said in the beginning, that every SSA is different. And, you know, in New Hampshire, I remember when our SSA would go after people and penalize them for speaking out. And even though they're better now, they still have their challenges. So I think full on, you know, this opportunity and thinking about how to approach a state is going to be different in each state, you know, because, you know, here's the other wrinkle in all of this. As we think about advocacy at the state level, obviously what we would love is all of the SSAs to come out in support of this concept. But we know there are SSAs that won't, because they don't want to be told what to do, because they might not be where other states are in thinking about investments in recoveries. There may be any number of reasons, but obviously I think, you know, there is some concern that not every SSA is going to be, or governor is going to be supportive of this concept for any number of reasons. So the question then becomes, and you all, to Holly's point, like, we also want to, from my standpoint, our standpoint, I want to really defer to your knowledge and expertise on the ground. You may come to a decision as a collective of advocates in your home state that the best thing to do is be quiet and not raise this with the SSA, and hope that this federal legislation passes and then directs the SSA to do something, right? Because there is that sort of counterintuitive risk that, well, if I go and I raise the flag on this issue, now they're paying attention to it. And if they don't like it, they may go out and make my life miserable in the short term, or worse, go to the federal government and say, we don't want this for our state. That's a calculus that I think states have to take on. Obviously, if there's an opening, if this is an opportunity to further the recovery dialogue, and you don't feel there's that kind of extreme risk, it may be worth trying it out as another opportunity. But I really do want to defer to just the realities of what you're facing, appreciating that, you know, and having heard from others like you, Jordan, for whom, you know, the relationship is acrimonious at best, and we want to be careful not to make it worse. I'll say one more thing on this, though, in that, and this has been a conversation at the national level. There's a couple of problems, right? It's one issue is money, but you can give, and we've learned this you can give money to the state. What they do with it is a completely different story. Whether they use it correctly, whether it's informed by their citizenry, whether it's fair, like, that's a totally different beast. So I think there is also awareness that even if we are successful in creating this set aside, that alone will not solve some of those challenges around, quite frankly, a lack of transparency, a lack of accountability, and a lack of engagement with the community in states when they get to their part of the decision-making tree. So there are other policy levers at a federal level that we've certainly contemplated, like, hey, do we try and lock in to this budget request something about, you know, mandating that states have to have a plan that's driven by the recovery community, or this, that, and the other thing. It's a little hard to get some of that policy change done through a budget vehicle. But there are other vehicles coming at the federal level in the next couple of years where I think some of what you're raising there may be other opportunities for us collectively to solve those. So I just want to name that because immediately you all have hit one of the biggest challenges, which we set aside the money or not, you're going to give it to my SSA. My SSA is who they are. There may be ways we can help work on that, but that probably won't come out of the budget process.
Thank you, Tim. And I agree with that point. That the securing the funding piece first conversation, that's one action, and then how that stuff gets spent, if approved, is a whole nother chapter. And this, Courtney, I think you're next. Courtney Allen's in Maine.
Thanks, Aaron. Hi, everybody. I'm Courtney. I just have a pretty simple question, I think. I've been having some preliminary conversations with state leaders on the 10% set aside. And the thing that they instantly say to me is that in the state of Maine, our Governor Mills, and our SSA has been very committed to recovery support services. And therefore, we actually spend more than 10% of our budget on recovery community support services. So they're pushing back on me around that. And I'm wondering about messaging. Is it just simply, I think you said it earlier, this is the floor, not the ceiling. And if the political winds change, we want to ensure that we're supported and protected. Am I on point there?
Yes, precisely.
Okay, thank you.
Yes. Yeah.
Johnny Fab, who's also in Pennsylvania. If anybody else have questions, you can just virtually raise your hand or wave at us and we'll try to find you.
Yeah, thanks, Garrett. Sorry, I called you Garrett. Sorry, Aaron.
It's not the first time.
I think this question's sort of been answered, but in Pennsylvania in the past, we've sort of went as a recovery community and talked with our Department of Drug and Alcohol and Department of Human Services about changing a line item for where federal block dollars were going out and could be used for peer support in all the counties, and must be used for peer support in the county. So, when I'm hearing when we're getting the budget item, we're getting that money. Is there a way, and you probably already said this, that we're just getting the money, then we figure it out downhill, but I'm seeing this money just coming and being absorbed into treatment and prevention and not misspent. So what I'm just specifically asking is, in that language, is if we're excluding massive treatment providers from getting this funding, if we're saying, yes, this money must be, you cannot spend it, you have to spend this certain amount with these organizations. I think I heard you right when you articulated that, Tim, but I just wanted to verify that not only is it we're telling them where to spend it, but we're telling them not where to spend it.
Correct. Yeah, that's where we're spending at the national level the most of our work right now, is developing that language to clearly define what non-clinical recovery supports mean and what they don't. What are the parameters of different kinds of organizations that would be eligible to receive those funds and not? And I have to, just as an aside, I'm appreciating some comments people are raising in the chat around nonprofit versus for-profit, because that is something that I'm mindful of. I think currently some language is floating that may be sort of more specific around nonprofits that we may want to tend to if there are models in the recovery space that would be omitted if they're not nonprofit in structure. But that's actually part of what we're doing right now is, and again, my hope, having worked so closely with our SSA in New Hampshire, is we want to make sure that whatever comes out is exactly right. What we're also figuring out is that the language that Congress puts in the budget, there's a congressional process, there's the appropriation, there's some supporting documents that kind of articulate Congress's intent. And then that's given to SAMHSA. And SAMHSA then puts it through their sausage making. And then what comes out sometimes is different, or sometimes is not what was originally intended. And that's the space that we're working in right now with Holly and others to try and make sure that that language is as concise as it can be. So that, because I saw it in prevention. I mean, I worked in prevention for years where I saw the prevention block grant get put to things that were not prevention as was intended by Congress. So we're trying to cut that off at the knees as quickly as we can. Again, I would imagine that even if the set aside gets approved and we're right on language, there will need to be continued work with SAMHSA and continued monitoring and listening to partners on the ground to make sure that if we catch any inconsistencies, once this rolls out, if there's other federal action needed to clean that up, we go back to that drawing board.
Thank you, Tim. Joanna, who's in West Virginia.
Yeah, I just have a question. It's around language. So here in West Virginia, we don't have any established RCOs. So the B Corps grants that have came out in the past year, year and a half, we've missed out on all of that money because the state, no, you're gonna have to wait, because the state has, like, they've made the language in receiving the B Corps grant, like you have to be a nonprofit for 2 years. You have to have X amount of money that organizations give to you to compensate for. So like, there's not really any recovery community organizations in West Virginia because the state hasn't, like, the language in the grants have just been too difficult for anybody to do anything with. But so if we have a good relationship with our SSA, how is it that we would go around about talking to them about making it easier to get that funding for the people that need it?
So I think I have a bunch of thoughts, but I also have a bunch of questions because, again, I think we can, and it might be helpful to, particularly those of you in states, we've had a similar conversation around facilitating organizations, right? We have certain states that have set up, even if they have RCOs, they're not set up in a model where you could just say, this goes to recovery community organizations and they could get the funding. And I've had similar experiences here in New Hampshire. So I think we would really appreciate if there's that kind of structural difference of language that is, if there are existing federal grant opportunities, then in theory, you should be able to access, but you can't. Us understanding what those barriers are would help make sure that at least at the federal level, we can get that language right. And then I think, states are different because the other dynamic with state agencies, and we've dealt with it in New Hampshire, is that there are as well some regulations that have absolutely nothing to do with federal guidance, state guidance. And so, like in New Hampshire, as a lot of people are talking about, well, LLCs or for-profits aren't eligible for these dollars. In the state of New Hampshire, the way contracting works with HHS, they are, but that's a state decision. So there's some stuff that can be answered at the federal level. There's some stuff that may require continued advocacy with the state, but we would be particularly interested in that example, like what you raised. If there are federal grant dollars that the recovery community has not been able to access because of eligibility criteria, what those eligibility criteria were versus what they should have looked like would be helpful for us to know so that we can make sure to the best that we can that the federal language speaks to that in a way that may prevent the state from making those kind of inadvertent decisions.
I just want to throw, I will get to Anna in a second too, who's in DC, but Michelle had put a piece in the chat. If we're in a state that supports this already, is there specific things that we can do to support other states in their efforts, or what do you want those SSAs in those states to say out loud, or like how does that, what is the ask for some of the states that are already behind it?
Well, I could just and then Tim, please try, but and I'm not sure, I thought Ryan was here earlier, but I'm pretty sure because our state SSA is supporting this too, and we're asking her to reach out to her colleagues and other SSAs in states to let her know that she's supporting this, and to use those because she could reach out to any SSA and get a direct meeting, and that's a powerful thing coming from one of their colleagues. So that's just one thing we asked here in Nevada. I'm not sure if there's other.
I'll just jump in on the ask too. So the letter, hey everybody, it's Ryan. The Action Network letter that went out that you all pushed around so much, and like I think 1,300 people have signed it so far, which has just been phenomenal. The day that went out, I don't know, and I heard from several other people, but I received several texts from single state agents in different states that were asking what's going on with the letters and like, why is my email box jamming up with letters, and then the next question was, who else is getting these letters? And the answer was your boss, your governor. And before that happened, there was a lot of discussion with NASDAD, which is kind of the association that, if you think of like a membership association, that's like the gel of all the single state agents. That's them. It's their lobbying arm in Washington, D.C. And there was this huge push to not do anything or to even possibly oppose this because Congress is going to ask the SSAs, Congress is going to ask NASDAD what they think of it. And there was a lot of tug and pull on the board of directors for NASDAD about what to do. And after it became, because you got to remember, single state agents for the most part are not used to getting lobbied like members of Congress. They are not used to their email boxes getting blown up. They are not used to people. They operate almost as a shadow, and most people, the public, they don't know their names a lot. I mean, I think for me, right? I know for me here in Nevada and a lot of our advocates and in other parts of the country, they didn't know their single state agents' names, and the single state agents like that, right? Because there's a level of accountability that kind of is erased when that happens. And I think the fact that you all have been able to be so successful in letting them know that they are known and that we are watching what they're doing and using it as an engagement opportunity with them has really put the brakes, at least as of today, with some of these decisions that NASDAD was going to go down with. Like, I know that there are now members of the board who are not just saying we should stay quiet on it, but are pushing hard, saying NASDAD and the single state agents as a group have to figure this out and have to figure out a way to support this. They cannot come out and oppose it. And that's because very quickly there's been a lot of advocacy. So I know there's a lot of things that can be done on the federal level, but we have to remember that the feds, they're very smart people, but they're not very smart about certain things. And recovery seems to be something that they're still getting very educated on. And for decades now, they have always looked to NASDAD for what to do. And they're going to do the same thing with this. And so the more we can put pressure on those state agencies to, say, hey, this is a good thing, but also, I'm getting a lot of feedback in my state. And the more we can put pressure on the governors who hire those single state agents. So single state agents are not elected officials. So the public or the elected official that's accountable to you and accountable to us is that governor, right? And so pressure on that governor is very helpful too. And I think that that's just a gap that this team here on this call and beyond this call has identified that we haven't really had much capacity for in terms of advocacy. And in the last 10 days, have really made a huge impact with a group of very powerful people that determine, how these dollars get spent, and also that Congress really relies on for advice.
Thank you, Ryan. I see a lot of folks in the chat appreciative of those comments, and just seeing that change within a week, that's why it's just the all hands on deck sort of piece to this, the consistent messaging, whether it's to SSAs or US senators in Congress. Anna Jones, who is in DC, let's get you have a question.
Thank you, Aaron. And thanks for just having this. This is awesome. And it really makes me feel that we're seen and heard. And it truly needs to happen. But my question, and I don't know who can answer it, is that we've noticed that a lot of in the recovery housing piece, that there's no technical assistance. Would that be something that's going to be specific in what we're trying to do? The wording, should it be more specific so that they know exactly what's missing in that piece when it comes to recovery housing? Because that is one of the struggles that we feel, is lacking, technical assistance.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I would say, I think Holly can confirm for me, in the language that has begun to be developed to bring out these definitions, we've included technical assistance. It's because we've heard in the recovery housing space, in the development of RCO spaces, facilitating organizations, et cetera, that these dollars need to be available for services being delivered and the necessary sort of back of the house work that is needed to make those services, make those organizations possible. So we've worked to explicitly include that in the language so that the dollars can be used for that kind of resource.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
And Garrett, I think you can grab this last one too to sum up the ask too, because Michelle had asked so to be clear, if the ask for support of state, if you're in a state where the SSA already supports it, yes, talk to other SSAs, but what about engaging the governor that way too?
Yeah, let Ryan, I think Ryan.
Yeah,
you
I'll just say like,
Cool.
and this is like where it's a huge lift, but I could tell you if any of you have any really good relationships with your governor, and you can get your governor to say like how needed this is and how it would be used in the state, and what a good thing it is to allocate this money towards these services, and particularly those of you who live in blue states. I mean, I'll just say it, they want to lift up Biden's budget, and folks where it's an easy ask for them to come out and support the budget with this set aside, that would be huge. It always looks good when governors are stepping up and supporting this. Yes, engaging the governor the same way is just as important, if not more important, and DC as well, Anna, for sure. Absolutely. DC, I learned recently too that DC has its own version of an attorney general, which is fascinating.
and I think and I think like, as if I'm going to put this form back in, if you are not participating in the organizing team meetings where a lot of our states are focusing on this, and you've joined this call because somebody shared with you to join, I'm going to put that there so we can just email you and plug you into.
One last thing too, for those of you that are kind of maybe stumbling on like the relationship factor with your single state agent or your governor and may not have one yet, a really good way to get a phone call from them and build a quick relationship is to write an op-ed for your local paper. Don't shoot for like USA Today or something. Like, find a statewide paper or a city, the city you live in that has circulation, even if it's just an online piece, and write something about the 10% and how needed it is in your state, and the disparity in services and the overdose numbers, and how the time is right, and how your state could put these dollars to use. And if you do want to write that op-ed, and I don't know if Greg's on this call, but I'm going to go ahead and volunteer him, and you need some specific numbers for how this money could benefit your state and where the current levels are at and what they could be at, and then whatnot, I will help you do that, and I'd be happy to proofread it. I'm not going to write it, I can't edit it, but I will help you proofread it, and I will definitely provide suggestions and help you find the right editor to pitch it to in your state. But that is a phenomenal way to get the attention of them, because it all goes in especially if you mention the governor by name and your single state agent by name, they all have Google News alerts and they try to keep off that thing. So yeah, that's another good action you could take.
So I think for our state organizing team members, I know that we've been talking about it on some of the team meetings, but to make sure that this is on your upcoming, whenever your next team meeting is, within the next 2 weeks, to make sure this is a big piece of the agenda item of messaging, who the best messengers are. I saw Jordan talk about in Pennsylvania. She's like, I might not be the best messenger, but and so it depends on so that's for each team to talk about that. And Tim's point too, some of the SSAs we might want to leave alone. We have to figure out, right? Like, we have to figure out state by state what the best strategy moving forward is, and so that is a conversation for your team. And I know a lot of you had said, we have this inroad to this SSA, we have a good relationship here, we have a hostile relationship here, and so that's for all of us to kind of make sure that we're getting together in terms of messaging and delivering that, and setting up those calls. Can we get on a Zoom with an SSA? Can we get a meeting with some grassroots advocates in the SSA, and and Holly and her team and Tim and Greg have been great in terms of messaging around that. Some of the messaging to the federal delegation and the SSA is going to be is similar. And so if you have questions specifically about what is that specific ask, what is the best thing to be asking right now, whether you're SSA supportive or not at the moment, what can we ask them to do? That is what we're gonna nail down in these state organizing team calls.